So here are the 3 C's of marriage that you do not want to do without: commitment, communication, and compromise. When we talk about commitment, you said I do. That's a commitment. I do, for better or worse, in richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. That is a commitment. That is a promise that ought to be fulfilled. A lot of times people only want to do when things are good, when you're in love, when there are butterflies, when you're excited, when you agree on everything. But to commit does not mean to only commit in good times, which is why the wedding vow is basically you committing to opposite sides of the pole, whether you're rich or whether you're poor, whether you're sick or whether you're well, because life operates in that way. Nothing is ever the same throughout your entire life. We live from glory to glory, yes, but there's also realistic challenges that we go through in this thing called life, on this journey called life. We have to learn to navigate, adapt, be flexible, and change with the times. Okay, so let's talk quickly about commitment. To commit means to completely devote yourself and stand by something. To vow to stand by something, that's a commitment, that I'm going to be here no matter what. So when the going gets tough, this is not the time we walk out. This is not the time we say, you know what, I can't do this anymore. This is not what I signed up for. Well, even if you date for 10 years, there are things that I guarantee you, which you shouldn't date for 10 years, but there are things that I guarantee you don't know about your spouse until you move in as a couple, as a lawfully wedded couple. Things change. Dating is one thing. Even living, cohabiting is still one thing. Being married is a whole different level of commitment. It is not just a piece of paper, as people like to claim on social media these days. Marriage is a serious covenant. You're not just committed to your spouse, but you're committed to God. God instituted marriage. So we can't come in and take the person who created the thing, take him out of it. This is what a lot of marriages are breaking, because we're doing it without God. But there'll be a video coming up on that. So that's commitment. You don't commit only in the good times. You commit even when it's bad, even when it's tough, you still commit. All right, let's talk about communication. Like I said before, communication is basically what you can't wait when you meet somebody. You want to talk to them. Even when you're asleep, you still want to talk. But the first thing that goes out of a marriage when it gets difficult is communication. If you don't communicate at all, then we can't even talk about effectiveness. But even if you are communicating, is the communication effective? Is the communication useful, helpful? Is the communication what God intended it to be? Is it verbal? Is it physical? How are you communicating with your spouse? Are you able to send a message to your spouse as a sender and your spouse receive it as a receiver appropriately, hear you well enough? Are you actively listening when you're communicating with your spouse? Or are you just talking to get your point across? Or are you doing whatever it takes? Or are you bullying your way through? Or are you using other tactics so your spouse doesn't talk at all or doesn't address issues? Communication is the key. God created man so that he can fellowship with man. All right? Before all these things happened in the garden, God created men for fellowship. But same way goes for us. We are relational beings. We're supposed to be communicating. We're supposed to be speaking to one another. We're not supposed to be silently treating other people. You know, the silent treatment. Some people have mastered it so well. If you're doing that to your spouse today, I urge you to stop it. It is emotionally destructive. Don't treat your spouse as if they're not present or they're non-existent. So that's the silent treatment. Don't, talk down at your spouse verbally. Don't shove them. Manage your tone when you're speaking to your spouse. So the way you communicate is important. Is the person hearing you? As a speaker, it is your job, your prerogative to ensure that the listener understands what you are saying. Yes, it is true that when you're communicating, you could be going against a lot of gradients. Let me explain. If I'm talking to you and you're listening to music, you're not necessarily going to hear what I'm saying, at least not well. And so my job is to communicate effectively, but it's also your job to ensure that there are no noise behind when you're listening to me. So if I'm talking to you and you're offended and you're giving me the silent treatment and you're like a ticking time bomb, which I will do a video on ticking time bombs, okay? Where you don't want to talk to your spouse and you just can't wait for them to ask you one question and you just go off on them. That communicative tool is not effective. You want to be able to speak and say what you mean to say. And try not to filter what you're hearing through offense. Because when you filter what you hear through offense, guess what? You're not hearing your spouse. You're hearing them based on how you're feeling. And feelings have no place when it comes to communication. Put your feelings aside. Be objective. Be an active listener. Know what is being said. Be willing to hear clearly what your spouse is saying. Ask questions. So as a listener, that is your responsibility. You can say, oh, I didn't get that. Oh, I didn't understand it. Well, I hear you saying that. And then you say it. Use I statements. Don't get caught up in you did this and you did that. That's when you begin to blame in communication, there's no more communication. You literally place a wall between you and your spouse. So do all you can to communicate effectively. So we talked about commitment, communication, and now compromise. You're not always going to get your way. There are times where your spouse may say, all right, go ahead. But there are also spouses that have been trained or gotten used to saying okay for everything. Saying okay, all right, fine. All right. But then they're upset and they resent you. Resentment will kill a relationship faster than anything else. Because you're with a person that you're not happy with. You feel like they're always telling you what to do. You feel like they're forcing things down your throat and you're like, I don't want this. I don't want to do what you're saying, but fine. Like fine. Fine is not always fine, okay? Remember that. Fine is not always fine. Okay? Okay doesn't always mean okay. Although, when you're communicating with your spouse, you need to be clear on what you're saying. When you say okay, it should be okay. You should mean what you say and say what you mean. Don't try to get your spouse to read between the lines. And a lot of couples do that. A lot of spouses do that, and that's not fair. That person cannot read your mind. Say what you mean. If you're not fine, say I'm not fine. But can we talk about this later? But don't say I'm fine and then slam the doors in the house. That's also communication, but very ineffective communication. All right. So compromising will definitely have to do with communication a lot, because if you're not communicating effectively, it's hard to compromise. It doesn't mean you give up everything and agree with everything your spouse says, but you agree or you compromise on a stance, understanding both positions. It's very important to understand each other in both positions that are coming at you. It is not good when you just get up and say, okay, but it is not okay. So you compromise based on the information and knowledge that you currently have. So that's very important, to commit, to communicate effectively, and compromise as a couple. And these are ways that marriages can begin to stand. Marriages, even if you're having difficulties right now in your marriage, try these 3 tips and see how things go for you. So this is Coach Yaboa. Until next time, please subscribe to the channel, share with others.